A hooded figure holds a strange glowing vessel. We are in the kingdom of Pharaohs, a land ruled by mages, a kingdom embroiled in a long war for succession. Inside the throne room, a young prince issues a dark command. His loyal followers seem pleased by the order. They praise his decisiveness, seeing a future king. He demands the complete annihilation of his rival's house. But one of his guards seems to hesitate. A sudden, chilling unease washes over him. Too late. A mysterious figure now stands over his fallen form. The white-haired man calmly addresses the young royal. The prince is stunned into silence, his plan shattered. One of his assassins steps forward, ready to eliminate the intruder. He leaps forward in a blur of motion and light. The intruder's crimson eyes track the attack. The assassin sneers, identifying him as one of the magicless. He boasts that such a simple ambush is useless, but his blade is stopped with a single firm grip, and in the next moment he's met with overwhelming force. The prince's champion is slammed to the floor, defeated. The young royal watches in utter disbelief and terror. A diagram explains the lethality of a precise, non-magical strike. The intruder reminds him that magic can't erase human fragility. A lesson the prince is learning far too late. Our boy just stands there, completely unfazed. Now the old court mage prepares to intervene. He gathers lightning into his staff, chanting an incantation, and unleashes a spell called Jawbreaker. But his spell is cut short by a hand to his face. A swift strike dislocates his jaw, silencing him completely. He tells the mage that chanting is now impossible, but the old man seethes with silent fury. He declares he doesn't need incantations for this. The intruder's crimson eyes narrow in anticipation, as the mage's staff is hurled forward with magical force. But it's no use, he was warned. The prince collapses in terror, his last hopes shattered. Our boy asks why he's so surprised. The desperate prince draws his sword, accusing him of being an assassin for his rival Hines. He confirms he's an assassin, but not for hire. The prince can only stare, utterly confused. He then breaks into a crazed laugh, mocking the idea of royalty having friends. A dark memory flashes through the intruder's mind, of his people, the Galda, treated as less than human. The prince tries to bargain, offering to double, even triple his payment, but his words are cut short by a final, decisive movement. And as the prince falls, the intruder makes one thing clear. They are not livestock. In the aftermath, the second prince's death is officially ruled an illness, and a state funeral is held. With the long and bloody palace intrigue finally over, a new figure sits in quiet contemplation. A young woman with blonde hair reads by candlelight. The intruder appears from the shadows, making his presence known. She looks up, addressing him as Hines. She declares that with her brother gone, she is now certain to become the next king. He asks how it feels to finally achieve her dream, but she corrects him, stating this is where their dream truly begins. She swears that once she ascends the throne, she will end the discrimination against the non-magical Galda. He smiles softly, telling her he believes she will. They hold hands under the moonlight, two friends bound by a shared purpose. She asks if he'll attend her coronation, but he reminds her a Galda would be thrown out. She promises that won't happen, not when she is king. He appreciates the thought, but advises her not to cause trouble so soon after taking power. She understands, thanking him for his consideration and calling him Van. Hines then gets an idea. She suggests that with the fighting over, he should return home for a while. Van agrees with a gentle smile. She tells him to go and be with his family. He journeys to a secluded home, nestled far from the royal court. The first order of business is washing away the dust of his travels. Guess his idea of a spa day is a little different than most. Lantern in hand, he walks through the familiar halls. He enters his private study, a place of intense preparation. Books filled with magical theory are piled high on his desk, and wooden dummies stand ready for his relentless training. He looks at an anatomical chart, the battle finally behind him. His mind drifts back to a conversation with Hines. She had voiced her concerns about the powerful mages they would have to face. The kingdom's elite, magicians, swordsmen, and warriors. But even back then, a young Van was resolute. He simply declared his intention to learn magic as well. Hines was stunned, reminding him that he had no magical ability. He swore he would know magic better than anyone in the world, and perfect his martial arts to counter it. He says it with such confidence as if it's just that easy, a determination that she could only admire. Back in the present, he flips through a well-worn book. It had been a long, long fight to get to this point. The next day, Van walks through a bright and lively town. A merchant hawks his goods to passers-by. Van's eyes land on some rare fruit, a perfect gift for his return. He pictures a smiling young girl, remembering how much she loved them. The thought brings a warm, genuine smile to his face, but his warm thoughts are quickly interrupted. The merchant's friendly demeanor vanishes. He points to a sign, refusing to sell to a Galda. Van's expression darkens under his hood. He simply presents 2 silver coins. The merchant's greed quickly overrides his prejudice. Van dangles the payment before him, asking if his money is good here or not, but his presence doesn't go unnoticed by others. They whisper about a Galda walking so freely, warning each other to keep their distance, as if his lack of magic were some kind of plague. Van knows better. You can't catch what isn't a disease. The Galda are the only race in the world born without magic, a history of oppression decreed by ancient kings. They were systematically exploited for labor and war, and when the people grew restless, the Galda were offered up as a convenient scapegoat. The memory of this injustice makes his blood boil. He wonders if his people will ever truly be free. Just then, a young girl's voice calls out. She trips and falls while playing in the street, and immediately bursts into tears. A classic. Van's hardened expression softens with concern. He kneels down to see if she's all right. The girl looks up, noticing his crimson eyes. He simply confirms it with a gentle nod. But instead of fear, her face lights up with awe. Van is caught completely off guard by her reaction. She thanks him and runs off to rejoin her friends. He believes this country can be changed. No, he and Hines will change it. This is where their dream truly begins. He finally arrives home, admitting he's very late. 10 years, he muses, hoping they'll be happy to see him. His mind drifts back to the day he left. His mother had teased him about finding a wife, a suggestion his little sister, Lena, fully endorsed. His mother told him to give his journey his all, but reminded him that if things ever got too hard, he could always come back home. Lena promised his favorite soup would be waiting. A solid bribe, honestly. They said their goodbyes with a warm hug and a parting gift. A red pendant he still carries with him. He smiles, the memory warming his heart. He takes the final steps toward his village, only to be met with an absolute nightmare. His home, his entire village, is burning. His mind can't comprehend the devastation. He sprints toward the flames, his heart pounding. He screams, asking if anyone is safe. He finds a body on the ground. He rushes to the fallen villager's side, but it's far too late. His eyes widen in horror at what he sees next. The bodies of his people, left as a brutal warning. He finds another victim lying lifeless in the grass. His mind reels, trying to make sense of the carnage. But then, a desperate hope. His mother and Lena aren't among the dead. He runs through the inferno, calling out for them. He looks down from the hill, seeing the source of the smoke, and his world shatters in an instant. He can only whisper his mother's name in disbelief. He reaches out a trembling hand, unable to process the sight. She's been made into a gruesome example for all to see. A silent scream builds behind his eyes. He collapses, his mind rejecting the horrific reality before him. But a faint voice cuts through his despair, calling for her brother. He spots Lena, injured but alive in the tall grass. She struggles to stay conscious, then collapses. Van rushes to her side, begging her to hold on. With her last bit of strength, she warns him to run. She tells him that the attackers were looking for him. He wonders if it's the second prince's men, but knows it can't be. He holds her close, telling her to save her strength. He promises to get her to safety, but then sees the ground beneath her. He realizes with dawning horror that she's lost too much blood. But Lena has one last thing to say. She remembers learning to cook with their mother, and with a tearful smile, she says she wanted him to taste her soup. Van can only watch, his heart breaking into a million pieces. A single tear rolls down her cheek. She reaches up to touch his face one last time. Her eyes are filled with a love that transcends the pain. She tells him that none of this is his fault. And with her final breath, her hand falls away. He holds her lifeless body, whispering her name into the night. But his moment of grief is cut short by a blade through his back. A knight runs him through while he's cradling his dead sister. Real classy. The knight's comrades cheer, celebrating their cowardly attack. They declare victory over Van, the supposed rebel leader. But the knight is stunned that he's still standing. Van's eyes burn with a cold, silent fury. The knight has one last question for him. He asks if Van deliberately took the fatal blow. Van's gaze is fixed, his mind somewhere else entirely. He whispers that there's nothing left, nothing he wants to live to protect. The knight pities him, raising his sword for a final strike. But Van has a question of his own. He demands to know who ordered this massacre. The knight smirks, revealing it was a royal command. A sacred decision that the Galda are no longer needed. Van screams in denial, refusing to believe his friend would do this. Just then, a familiar voice cuts through the chaos. It's Hines, walking calmly through the flames. Van's shock turns to utter disbelief. She walks past her knights, chiding him for being late. She even jokes about him buying souvenirs. Great timing, Hines. He can only ask her one thing. Why? She looks at him without a trace of pity and says it's all his fault. She explains that an undetectable assassin like him and the non-magical race that produced him are both threats to the kingdom's peace, and so they must be completely destroyed. The truth hits him like a physical blow. He's been used. Hines declares she will keep her promise to end discrimination by eradicating the Galda from existence. As the knight brings his sword down for the final blow, Van catches the blade with his bare hand. The knight freezes, completely shocked. Hines calls Van a monster, unleashing her power, but her soldier just scoffs, clearly overconfident. The others charge, screaming to protect their king. But Van is a blur of motion, a storm of vengeance. He prepares a secret technique of the Galda, a final desperate attack called Absolute Blossom. At the same time, Hines prepares her own spell, an ultimate arrow formed from pure light. The two former friends meet in a clash of power, and the world explodes in a blinding flash. In the aftermath, her knights lie defeated. Against all odds, Van is still on his feet. Hines observes him with a cold, detached gaze, noting that he's still protecting his sister's body. Real sharp, Hines. She muses that he would never kneel, even in death, calling him a fool for his unwavering principles. She says her final goodbye to Van, admitting that his strength was a miscalculation, and with that, his body finally gives out. He drifts into darkness after a long slumber, but a strange red-eyed wolf finds him. It decides to offer him a single chance. As Van's life hangs in the balance, the creature tells him to do better next time. A mysterious red energy flows into him. He wakes up in a daze, looking at his feet. He raises a hand, questioning if he's even alive. He looks around the unfamiliar room, but a stone pillar seems strangely familiar. A familiar voice calls out, asking if he's finally awake. It's Lena, alive and well, teasing him for being sleepy. She tells him their mother has prepared a feast to celebrate. A celebration for his birthday, she happily reminds him. His mother joins in, telling him he's 15 years old now. He stares at his reflection, seeing his younger self from 10 years ago. A memory of a peaceful day, a life he thought was lost forever. He's completely stunned by this impossible reality. His family is here, safe and sound, enjoying the beautiful day. He wonders if the massacre was all just a terrible nightmare. He looks out at his village, whole and untouched by fire. But as he moves, he feels a strange power coursing through him. A flower petal drifts down from the sky. He stands his ground, feeling the world around him. He clenches his fist, the strength of his future self still there, and catches the petal with impossible speed and precision. He stares at it amazed as Lena watches in the background. He realizes with chilling certainty that it wasn't a dream. The memory of his burning home is still vivid. Lena's dying words echo in his mind. The cold betrayal of his closest friend, and the searing pain of the blade that ended his life. All of it was real. A future he somehow survived. He looks at his hands, the hands of a boy with the soul of a killer. Lena asks if something is wrong. Understatement of the century, kid. But Van forces a smile, assuring her that everything is fine. His mother calls them over, announcing the feast is ready. And for a moment, he lets himself enjoy this impossible gift, celebrating with his family. Elsewhere, a group of riders gallops through the forest. A determined young woman with green eyes leads the charge. She questions the knight's actions, worried about civilian casualties. But her subordinate assures her their destination is the Galda district. The woman's eyes are filled with a grim resolve. The knight scoffs, calling the Galda livestock, not citizens. A look of cold fury flashes across her face. She says nothing more, simply urging them to ride faster. Back in the past, Van savors a spoonful of soup, lost in the familiar taste. His mother teases him, asking why he's so sentimental about a dish she just made. Lena proudly announces that she helped cook it this time. Van jokes about the lumpy vegetables earning a playful punch from his sister. Their mother watches the two of them, her heart full. But Van's mind is elsewhere, still grappling with his return to the past. He wonders if this is truly a chance to start over. His mother's voice breaks his train of thought, calling his name. She asks if he's still worried about choosing his future. Van looks up, momentarily confused by the question. He remembers that at 15, every Galda man must decide his path, and with no family business to inherit, his options were limited. He could stay and perform low-wage labor in the village, or leave to face contempt and backbreaking work elsewhere. The third choice, become a mercenary, a high-risk, high-reward gamble. While lacking magic, the Galda possess incredible physical strength. Their inability to be detected by magic makes them perfect scouts. But this also means they're used as expendable pawns on the front lines, a grim reminder of the fate that awaits most of them. Yet for the few who survive, a fortune is promised. He recalls his mother's embrace, her quiet fear. She admitted his father's pay is what kept them fed, but she couldn't bear to lose her son. Van knew the casualty rate was high, a desperate choice for survival. In his first life, he chose that path, and it led him straight to Hines. He remembers the moment he met her, his eyes burning with resolve, and the determined gaze of the young royal who would become his friend. But the memory is shattered by a sudden frantic sound. The village bell rings out, a clear sign of danger. Van looks out over his home, a terrible realization dawning on him. He remembers now, a crucial detail he had completely forgotten. He bolts from the table, warning his family to stay away from town. But they follow him, and he turns to ask where they're going. His mind flashes to a gathering of robed fanatics, preaching of sin. Their leader calls for a purge to protect the pure bloodline, real original stuff. He remembers their twisted words echoing through the streets, how they branded the Galda as a detestable impurity, a darkness that needed to be cleansed from the kingdom. He knows exactly who they are, the Purification Sect, a fundamentalist group from within the kingdom's main religion. Their ideology was so extreme, even the church called them heretics. One of their core beliefs was that the Galda were demons to be eradicated, and on his 15th birthday, they came to his home. After being exiled from the capital, they fled straight to the Galda district. With no real security, the town was easily conquered and subjected to their purification. In his first life, all he could do was hide with his family, a terrified boy, powerless to stop the slaughter. But this time, things are going to be very different. He moves with a predator's grace, stalking his prey, leaping from the rooftops like a phantom. He lands without a sound, a killer in a child's body. The sect's leader continues his sermon, promising to cleanse the town. He holds a torch to a captive, calling it a purifying flame. How thoughtful, but his speech is cut short by a shadow descending from above. Van recalls the first rule of fighting mages: surprise attacks from outside their perception, and a single decisive blow to a vital point. The leader falls before he can even react. His followers can only stare in disbelief. A child has just taken down their strongest mage. One of them ignites his blade, screaming in fury. But Van is already on him, turning the weapon back on its owner. He knows only a magic-infused weapon can break a mage's barrier. So if you don't have one, you just borrow theirs. Resourceful. Another sect member prepares a lightning spell, but Van is far too fast for a chanted spell. He closes the distance in an instant. His eyes are cold, his purpose absolute, and another fanatic is taken out of the fight. He looks up at the last three, his work almost done. But a voice from the archway stops him cold. A new player has entered the game, holding a civilian hostage. He realizes he miscalculated, forgetting the stragglers. He weighs his options, knowing it's a trap. The fanatic tells the woman her fate is sealed. He tells her to blame the boy for her demise. Van screams for him to wait. He drops to his knees, hands raised in surrender. The coward smirks, believing he's won. He shoves the woman aside, his attention now on Van, and lunges forward to finish the job. But from the fanatic's point of view, something is wrong. He looks down, seeing the boy is completely unharmed. In fact, it's the hostage-taker who's on the ground, incapacitated. The last two fanatics seethe, vowing to make him pay. The last fanatic feels a deep sense of dread. He sees a monstrous aura around the boy, urging his comrades to act fast. But his partner has other ideas, deciding to take matters into his own hands. Just then, a new voice echoes through the square, casting an ice spell. A wave of frost rushes forward, catching the fanatic by surprise. He's instantly encased in ice, unable to move. Well, that's one way to cool off. The green-eyed woman from the forest arrives with her knights, warning him not to shatter. She declares the fanatics are under arrest by order of the kingdom. The man realizes with horror that the royal guard has arrived. Van is stunned. In his past life, help came much, much later. The frozen fanatic screams for his men to attack the woman. But it's no use, they're all frozen solid. The woman calmly reminds him that the fight is over. She orders her men to secure the prisoners. And just like that, the immediate threat is neutralized. Van can only watch, his plans completely upended. The woman turns her attention to him, surprised to see a child. She marvels that a boy managed to take down 3 mages alone. Van looks away, not used to this kind of attention. Her sharp green eyes seem to see right through him. A small appreciative smile crosses her face. She kneels down, telling him she owes him her thanks. She explains that the flame mage he defeated could have destroyed the entire town. Van looks back at the fallen leader, the memory of a burning village still fresh in his mind. She admits his surprise attack saved countless lives. And then it clicks for Van. Because he acted, the kingdom's response was faster this time. The woman offers him a reward, but he says he needs nothing. He simply offers his own thanks for their timely arrival. Intrigued by the boy, she reaches out and asks for his name. She introduces herself as Helene and makes Van an offer he can't possibly believe, an invitation to the Magic Academy. Van is stunned into silence by the proposal. The Magic Academy, a place he never thought he'd see. Helene explains it's a prestigious school founded by 3 nations, designed to recruit talent regardless of their background. Van knows the name well from his previous life. Guess he paid attention in history class. Many of the world's greatest heroes graduated from there, as did some of the most powerful magicians. He asks the obvious question, why him? Her gaze is sharp, analytical. She suggests they find a more private place to talk, and without waiting for an answer, she grabs his wrist. He's pulled along, surprised by her sudden action. She tells him to lead the way, admitting it's her first time here. A small, knowing smile plays on Van's lips. He guides her through the quiet, overgrown ruins. They arrive at a secluded spot near a stream. He confirms it's a quiet place, just as she asked, but her tone turns cold, noting it's a place where no one would notice a death. Suddenly, a massive magic circle erupts around her. Van's eyes widen, realizing this is a test. She unleashes a powerful ice arrow directly at him, but in a blur of motion, he's already behind her. Helene is shocked, questioning if he used instant movement magic, but she felt no magic, realizing he used pure physical technique to enter her blind spot. His crimson eyes burn with intensity as he holds her arm. He tells her to stop this charade, but she calmly asks why, revealing she sensed no killing intent from him at all. She notes he speaks like a seasoned warrior. Van asks if this was all just a test. She admits she prefers to verify things herself, and she's confirmed he can fight mages with pure skill. He asks what that has to do with anything. She believes he might be the one to change his people's fate, an idea that leaves Van completely stunned. A future, she says, is possible if he joins the academy. He realizes she's talking about something more. Knighthood. She seems surprised that he knows of the system. She confirms that with his abilities he could earn that title, a system known as Knight's Honor, rewarding top students. It grants them the right to establish a new noble house. She explains the territory granted is often tied to their origins, meaning Van could become the official lord of his own town. The weight of that possibility hits him hard. He considers the offer. It's a path he hadn't ruled out. And unlike his first life, he's still young enough to try. But before he agrees, he has 3 questions. Helene seems pleased, telling him to ask away. First, he points out the exam requires a noble's recommendation. She assures him that part is already taken care of. Well, that was easy. Van seems a little surprised by her enthusiasm. She eagerly asks for his second question. He thinks about the absurdity of the situation. A magicless boy earning knighthood at a magic academy. She agrees it's an unusual path, but she explains that all who've earned it have one thing in common. They all transcended tradition to discover a new principle of magic. Things like developing magical medicine or researching magic circles. She explains that a principle of magic isn't just about using magic, and that subduing mages without it is a worthy path to knighthood. He just needs to prove his unique ability to the world. Van tries to process this complicated idea. She then cuts to the chase, asking for his third and final question. Her gaze is intense, waiting for his answer. But Van is no fool. He asks what she wants from him in return. She feigns surprise, asking if he doesn't trust her. He clarifies that he needs to know what she gains from his success. She pauses for a moment, considering his question. She admits there's a benefit, but refuses to tell him what it is. Real trustworthy. Van's eyes narrow, his suspicion growing. A tense silence hangs between them in the quiet ruins. But their conversation is interrupted by a familiar voice. It's Lena, running towards them with a worried look. She says she heard he fought bad people, and he tries to calm her down. He apologizes for making her worry, assuring her he's fine. But his little sister isn't buying it for a second. She throws her arms around him in a tight hug. She scolds him for always being so reckless, telling him just how worried she and their mother were. Van can only hold her, the weight of her words sinking in. Helene watches the touching reunion from a distance. She finally speaks, telling him he doesn't need to trust her. But if he becomes a knight, he can protect his family legally. A fact she swears on her own name, Helene Steinartz. With her offer made, she turns and walks away, leaving Van to consider this new, unexpected path. He holds his sister tighter, his decision already made. He recalls his mother's sad expression when she heard he'd fought. His mother praises him, saying he's just like his father. She tells him this with a gentle, knowing smile. Later, Van explains the academy offer, shocking his family. He tells them about the recommendation and the path to knighthood. but they worry about him being surrounded by magic users. He tells them that's exactly why he has to go. Lena looks up at him, confused by his reasoning. He declares he'll prove that the Galda are second to none. He'd thought about it for days, seeing no other way to save them. His old path as an assassin is closed, and he will never trust a royal again. He knows he can't face the kingdom alone, and Helene's offer is his only chance. And since he's already died once, a little danger doesn't scare him. He will seize any opportunity to eliminate the discrimination against his people. His mother and sister can only listen, stunned by his resolve. His mother's eyes widen, seeing the fire in his. He sits before them, no longer a boy but a man with a mission. She realizes with a sigh that she can't possibly stop him. He looks down, asking if she can forgive his decision. She knows he wouldn't listen, even if she told him not to go. Wiping a tear, she admits that stubbornness runs in the family. Van looks up, offering a simple, heartfelt thank you. But his mother brings up a rather important detail: tuition fees. She reminds him that a fancy education isn't free. A classic mom move, and Van realizes he completely forgot about the money. His mother sighs, resigning herself to figuring it out somehow. Lena immediately volunteers to get a job, but Van quickly shuts that down. He panics, knowing there are no high-paying jobs in their small town. But as it turns out, the money problem was solved quite easily. Helene appears with the reward for defeating the sect, which she forgot to mention. And as she stands with his family, she says there's one more thing he needs to know. His mother warns him that he will face hardship, but she tells him to always remember he is her pride and joy. Van promises her that he'll do his very best. Lena chimes in, promising his favorite soup upon his return. He pats her head, saying he's looking forward to it. And with his goodbyes said, he turns to leave. His family waves him off on his new journey. He waves back, vowing that this time he'll keep his promise. And so, he walks toward a future he never thought possible. He finally arrives at the legendary Magic Academy, a place he'd only ever heard about in his past life. Inside, the halls are filled with aspiring students. A young noble presents his letter of recommendation and is quickly granted entry. Seems simple enough. Another student with a noble backer is also welcomed. Then it's Van's turn to step forward, but he's immediately stopped by one of the guards. The other students whisper, recognizing his Galda eyes with disgust. Van sighs, already tired of the familiar Prejudice. He calmly explains he's here for the exam. The guard scoffs, questioning if he even knows where he is. Van confirms he does, citing the school's open-door policy. The guard explodes with rage, accusing him of insolence. A blade is held to his throat, but Van seems unimpressed. He knows he could end this fight, but it would cost him his chance. Just then, 2 more guards arrive to intervene. Van hopes they might be a bit more reasonable, but the older guard just complains about the deluded types they get each year. So much for being reasonable. The guard explains that while the school doesn't discriminate on status, it requires a recommendation from a kingdom noble. The guard is stunned when Van says he has one. He presents the letter, complete with an official seal. The guard's eyes widen at the sight of the insignia, but his shock quickly turns to rage, accusing Van of forgery. He lunges forward to snatch the letter, calling it a crime. Van's expression remains completely unfazed. With a single, fluid motion, he trips the charging guard, sending the man tumbling to the ground. The other guards can only stare, completely bewildered, as do the other students watching the scene unfold. His partner asks what happened, but the fallen guard insists the kid did something. Just then, a new voice cuts through the commotion. The guards snap to attention, recognizing an examiner. The guard stammers, trying to explain the situation by blaming Van. The purple-haired examiner simply asks Van for his name. He introduces himself as Van Kruger, recommended by Helene Steinartz. The name alone seems to carry an almost magical weight, and the other students are shocked to hear it. The examiner takes the letter to inspect it himself. He confirms the seal and insignia are indeed from the Steinartz family. He apologizes for the guard's rudeness and welcomes Van inside. The crowd whispers in disbelief about the prestigious recommendation. Even the guards are left wondering just who this boy is. Van notes the sudden shift in everyone's attention. He realizes Helene is far more important than he ever imagined. He walks through the gates, taking in the massive academy. He can feel it in the air. This place is full of elites, but his gaze is steady, his resolve unshaken. He even recognizes a young master swordsman named Dietrich from his past life. Van's eyes narrow as he recognizes another face. The Grand Magician Shale of Flames, a legendary figure of immense power, and the Holy Maiden of Divine Power, Lunaris. He realizes they were all Academy graduates. His mind flashes back to his bloody past. Unlike him, they were celebrated heroes of the kingdom, but in the war for the throne, they became corrupt pawns. And in the end, they fell just like all the others. He remembers being the one to end them. But in this life, he'll compete with them in the open. And if he can succeed, he might just change the world. But his thoughts are interrupted by an arrogant voice. A young noble demands to know why he's standing there. Van calmly replies that he can stand wherever he pleases. The noble is enraged by his supposed insolence. He pulls the "Do you know who I am" card. Classic. Van considers just bowing his head to avoid the hassle. But he remembers his mother's words, to live with dignity. And he recalls someone else telling him the same thing. It was Hines, who said equality is never won by bowing. She had told him to act with dignity, calling him her hope. The noble's shouting snaps him back to the present. He grabs Van by the collar, demanding his attention. Van's eyes are cold as he points out who struck first. The noble is stunned by his calm defiance. With a subtle smile, Van grabs the boy's wrists, and with a fluid motion, sends him flying to the ground. He recalls the principle, using an opponent's force against them, just like with the guard. The other students can only stare, completely shocked. He even offers a hand to the noble he just put on the floor, asking with a smirk if he needs help with his dizziness. What a gentleman. The noble scrambles to his feet, seething with rage. But his attack is stopped by a powerful magical intervention. The other students watch, stunned by the sudden turn of events. Even Van is caught off guard by the newcomer. A young man with blonde hair steps forward, calling for unity. He tells the embarrassed noble to get up, calling the scene unsightly, and asks to be treated as just another candidate. He then turns his attention to Van, a friendly smile on his face, and Van realizes with a jolt, this is Prince Hines. The crowd whispers in awe, recognizing the 9th prince. They praise his fairness for taking the exam like everyone else, and his supposed tolerance for even speaking to a Galda. Van's mind flashes back to a forgotten conversation. He remembers Hines mentioning she once attended an academy, a detail that suddenly carries a terrifying new weight. The young prince approaches, noting that Van seems nervous. He admits he feels the same, given the exam's reputation. He extends a hand, offering to face the challenge together. Van stares at that friendly gesture, that disarming smile. A smile so warm it could make anyone feel at ease. A smile that could make anyone open their heart to him. But Van knows better. He knows the cold, calculating monster hiding behind that mask. He realizes he could end his greatest enemy right here, right now. But he holds back, knowing it would destroy his own plans. He clenches his fist, reminding himself why he came here. Hines notices his hesitation, asking if something is wrong. Van simply turns away, telling the prince he has no intention of being friends. Hines is left hanging, his friendly offer rejected. He slowly lowers his hand, a flicker of surprise on his face. The other students whisper, calling Van a beast for his lack of courtesy, and the noble he embarrassed can only seethe in silent fury. But their little drama is cut short by an official announcement. The examiner declares that the candidates will now be guided to the Shadowed Forest, a name that immediately puts the other students on edge, but Van's expression remains as steady as ever. They're led to a massive, magically charged forest, the site of their first trial. A new, more intimidating examiner welcomes them to the venue. He confirms that this forest is where their exam will take place, reminding them that the academy only accepts the best of the best. And this test is designed to weed out anyone who isn't ready. Van listens intently, taking in every word. Their task is to find a rare, magic-infused flower called Tears of Heaven. But he warns them that the forest's beasts are also magical and not to be underestimated. Van seems a little surprised they're being thrown into a practical combat exam so soon. The examiner lays out the rules. Cooperation is allowed, but sabotage is forbidden. The catch? A group needs enough flowers for every single member to pass. He smirks, warning them that larger groups will face greater challenges, and they only have until sunset to complete the task. The other examiner steps forward with one last item, a guardian badge. He explains that crushing it will summon a rescuer if they're in danger, but using it means instant disqualification. No pressure, right? With the rules explained, the exam officially begins. The students immediately begin to form alliances. Confident nobles and mages quickly pair off with one another, leaving Van completely alone, just as he expected. He doesn't mind, knowing it's far easier to move by himself anyway. But as he walks into the forest, he's being watched very closely. A hand offers him the guardian badge. And with that, Van walks into the ominous forest alone. But the arrogant noble he embarrassed is watching from the shadows. It doesn't take long for the first challenge to appear. Van calmly assesses the threat, a medium-sized beast demon. These creatures are animals infused with powerful magic. Their enhanced abilities can make them even more dangerous than mages. The beast lunges forward with a furious roar. Van realizes that in his past life, he mostly fought humans. He plants his foot, ready to meet the attack head-on, and unleashes a devastating blow to the creature's chest. It's an anti-beast technique known as crushing strike, a move designed to bypass defenses and cause internal damage. His crimson eyes glow with focus as he considers its weakness. He knows it's a difficult technique to land on an alert opponent, but it's perfect against a mindless beast demon. Guess this one's out of luck. The creature collapses to the ground, defeated in a single blow. He remembers encountering these beasts during his mercenary days. He knows exactly how to take them down, which is bad news for them, but he senses he's not alone in the woods. He scratches his head, feigning confusion at his audience. The noble and his friend can only stare, stunned by what they just witnessed. The noble scoffs, assuming Van used some kind of poison. His friend seems nervous, reminding him that interference is forbidden. But the noble insists the rules are just for show. He declares the examiners would never let a Galda pass anyway, especially not one who was so rude to the prince. He smirks, deciding no one will blame them if they take Van out. Meanwhile, in a dark underground passage, a nervous guard leads a robed figure forward. The robed figure declares his intention to target one person, the beast who dared to enter their glorious academy. He explains that while they can't refuse a recommendation, they can arrange for certain candidates to have accidents. And he doesn't care if anyone else gets caught in the crossfire. He notes that the Galda boy is moving completely alone, confident that no one would ever willingly approach him. The two stooges in the background beg to differ. A heavy lock is undone in the academy's depths, and the examiner unleashes a cursed beast from its prison, ordering it to eliminate the Galda and protect the academy's pride. A monstrous shadow with burning eyes answers the call. Meanwhile, the purple-haired examiner senses a shift in the air. He admits he has a very bad feeling about this year's exam. His colleague asks if there's a problem, but he says things are fine. The bearded examiner just smiles, saying he was preparing for the next phase, a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. And the other examiner's suspicion only grows deeper. Back in the sun-dappled forest, Van continues his search. He steps quietly through the undergrowth and stops, his eyes widening at what he's found. A patch of glowing flowers, just as described. He confirms that this must be the Tears of Heaven flower. He knows that picking it means he passes, but first, he calls out to the two students who've been following him. The noble smirks, surprised he was noticed, and makes a crude remark. Van just smiles back, saying it's experience. Cowards are predictable. He wryly admits he would know, being a former assassin himself. The noble declares they'll prove Van isn't fit for the academy. But Van cuts through the excuses, calling it what it is: revenge. His eyes glow with resolve as he promises to beat that petty pride out of him. The noble stammers, completely shocked by Van's confidence. Van calmly assesses his opponents, a swordsman and a mage. He runs through the three main combat styles, starting with the spellcaster. Then there's the magic swordsman, who channels power into his weapon. And finally, the martial artist who enhances their own body. He knows pairing different styles is a classic, if predictable, strategy. The noble scoffs, assuming Van has no real combat experience. Van admits they have the will to fight, but he can't just eliminate them. Because if a Galda dies during the exam, it's just an accident. But if a noble falls, their family will demand answers, and they will stop at nothing to get their revenge. He knows the nobles of this kingdom are not to be trifled with. Besides, he's decided to walk a different path this time. He'll break their spirits instead of their bodies, a much more satisfying victory. The noble seethes, enraged by Van's calm demeanor, and unleashes a powerful wind spell with a furious cry. A storm of invisible blades rushes forward. But Van dodges with impossible speed. The noble is stunned, admitting he's faster than he looks. He boasts that his family's magic is an invisible blade to the magicless. He offers Van a chance to beg for forgiveness. But Van just mocks him, asking if his family's job is to be the royal air conditioner. The insult sends the noble into a blind rage. He unleashes an even more powerful version of his attack. A tempest of wind tears through the forest floor. But the noble freezes, realizing Van can somehow see the attack. Van confirms it, his crimson eyes glowing as he senses the boy's killing intent. He closes the distance in an instant, delivering a precise strike. And the arrogant noble is sent flying, completely defeated. His friend can only watch in horror before preparing his own attack. He explains that a magic sword is just a normal blade without its wielder. But dodging a sword is much harder than dodging a punch. However, with Van's lightning-fast footwork, he closes the distance and targets the wrist, not the blade. It's a perfect counter to a magic swordsman's technique. His crimson eyes burn with cold, calculated focus. and with a single fluid motion, the second bully is on the ground. He can only curse his own weakness. Van stands over them, asking if they've finally had enough. He warns them that from this point on, he won't be holding back. The threat finally sinks in, their arrogance replaced by pure terror. The swordsman immediately starts begging for his life, but Van's attention is suddenly drawn elsewhere. He looks around, realizing something is very wrong. He screams for the two nobles to get away from him immediately, just as a monstrous beast crashes through the trees. All three of them are frozen in shock and terror. It attacks with overwhelming, unstoppable force, sending the two nobles flying through the air. Even Van is knocked off his feet by the sheer power of the blow. He can't believe what he's seeing. It's a Hellsbore, a high-level demon beast. The nobles realize a creature this powerful should never be in this forest. Its eyes burn with pure destructive energy, and Van knows the next charge is coming fast. Also known as the Cursed Fang, its power is said to rival siege magic. He grits his teeth, preparing for the worst. He tells the two nobles to run if they still can. But the arrogant noble is completely frozen in fear. He admits his legs won't move. Looks like our boy has two new liabilities. Van's eyes widen, realizing the extent of his injuries. He clutches his side, his ribs likely fractured from the impact. The two nobles are in a similar state, struggling on the ground. The arrogant noble admits that just standing is all he can manage. Van looks back at them, quickly weighing his options. He knows carrying them is impossible. This beast is relentless, using the badge as a gamble, as help might not arrive in time. The noble mage tells his friend to run and save himself. He declares he can handle this himself. Famous last words. His friend looks on, stunned by the sudden display of courage. But he refuses, saying abandoning a comrade would bring shame to his house. Van can only watch this unexpected moment of noble solidarity. He tells them to break the badge and call for help. He'll buy them time until the rescuers arrive. The noble grits his teeth, knowing that would mean failing the exam. He decides that staining his family's name is a fate worse than death. He and his friends struggle to their feet, preparing for a final stand. They declare they will fight and die with honor. Van looks on, completely exasperated by their foolish pride. He calls it cheap, and the noble screams back in fury. Van tells them if they're going to fight, they should fight to win. He asks if that isn't the true pride of a kingdom noble. The noble scoffs, but the words clearly hit their mark. The Hellsbore gathers its power, preparing for another devastating charge. Elsewhere, the bearded examiner looks up, sensing the time is right. His purple-haired colleague asks what he's talking about. The examiner dismisses it, asking if anyone has called for help. The other man confirms that so far it's been completely quiet. The bearded examiner smirks, thinking that's good, because it means his plan to eliminate Van is working perfectly. The Hellsbore roars, its eyes burning with rage. It leaps forward in a blur of unstoppable force. Van quickly forms a plan, telling them to attack on his signal. But the noble scoffs, refusing to take orders from a Galda. There's no time to argue. The beast is upon them. Van's eyes narrow, his focus absolute. He sprints forward to meet the charge head-on, preparing to unleash his most powerful technique. A combination of a strike and a crushing blow. He lands a direct hit right on the creature's head. The two nobles can only stare in disbelief. A diagram explains the principle of the strike, targeting the origin of the beast's movement. Its head. It was a perfect counter, a flawless execution, or so he thought. But his attack doesn't even break the skin. He's forgotten one crucial detail. He's only 15. His body lacks the power of his future self. He screams for the others to attack now. The noble unleashes his family's signature wind spell. A vortex of cutting wind slams into the beast. At the same time, his friend charges forward and strikes with a lightning-infused blade, but he can barely pierce its hardened hide. The combined attack only seems to make it angrier. Van screams a desperate warning. The beast gathers a massive amount of energy and unleashes a devastating shockwave. He can only brace for the impact. His eyes widen, checking on the others. They're both down, but thankfully still alive. The noble admits his wind spell barely deflected the blow. His friend despairs, his own blade completely useless. But Van stands over them, declaring they'll try one more time. The noble can only stare, shocked by his insane confidence. Van's crimson eyes narrow with focus. He promises that next time, they'll finish it for good. The noble screams back, saying they can't even pierce its defenses. So Van gives him a tip. Adds some rocks to his wind spell. A little grit goes a long way. He tells the swordsman to aim for the ribs and thrust, not slash. The noble looks on, wondering what Van is planning. Van's gaze is cold and calculating. He tells them to use him as bait to escape. The noble smirks, agreeing not to hold back since he already tried to take him out once. But Van isn't interested in their petty revenge. His goal is to earn recognition for his family and his people, and he can't do that by abandoning his countrymen. The noble is left completely speechless by his words. He remembers his own arrogance and Van's quiet dignity, and for the first time, he feels a sense of shame. But their moment is cut short as the Hellsbore roars again. Van screams for them to attack. The noble unleashes his own spell with a determined cry. A massive vortex of sand and gravel erupts from his magic circle. The new attack slams into the beast just as Van predicted, and the swordsman moves in for his own strike. Van grins, seeing his plan worked perfectly, blinding the beast. The creature thrashes wildly, knocking the two nobles aside. Van sees his opening and rushes forward. He leaps onto its back, targeting the shoulder blades. He knows they aren't connected to the spine, a perfect weak point. A diagram explains its forelegs are flexible but unstable. He uses that weakness to unleash a technique called rotation and sends the massive creature crashing to the ground. He screams for the swordsman to make his move now. The target, the heart, located right at the base of its leg. The young noble gathers his courage and his magic. The beast's eye widens as the blade descends. He drives his sword deep into the creature's weak spot, but his face falls in disbelief. The blade is stuck, unable to pierce any deeper. He screams, pouring every last ounce of strength into the attack. The arrogant noble celebrates their victory a little too soon, but Van knows this fight is far from over. The blade only grazed the beast's heart, a non-lethal wound that only served to enrage it. It thrashes wildly, sending the swordsman flying, and unleashes a devastating, destructive roar. A special ability unique to the most powerful demon beasts. Its magic-infused cry creates a massive shockwave, flattening everything in its path. The arrogant noble looks down at his bleeding hand. He's paralyzed, his internal organs damaged by the blast. The Hellsbore turns its furious gaze upon him. He can only stare back, accepting his fate. But Van leaps in, stopping the tusk with his bare hands. He prepares another harmony technique, Spiral, a move designed to redirect an opponent's force into the ground. The beast's eyes burn with overwhelming power, but Van realizes he can't redirect it all. He considers using a hidden power, knowing it's his only chance. The arrogant noble can only stare in utter terror. Van screams at him to just run. He scrambles away as fast as his injured legs will carry him. But the Hellsbore is relentless, charging right at Van. He grits his teeth, bracing for the full force of the attack. He tries to redirect the blow, but the power is overwhelming, and he's sent flying through the air like a rag doll. He hits the ground hard, the impact shaking him to his core. The swordsman calls out his name in a panic, but Van screams for them to stay back. The beast looms over him, preparing a final crushing blow. It raises a massive tree trunk, ready to end him for good. Van looks down, his resolve hardening. He decides to unleash the power he's been hiding. A dark crimson energy begins to flow from his heart. The Hellsbore senses the shift and hesitates for a moment. A massive blast of energy erupts from Van's body. The beast is caught completely off guard by the sudden attack, and is sent tumbling backward by the sheer force of the blast. Van looks up, wondering about the strange magic he just used. Just then, a new figure arrives, calling the situation close. The two nobles are stunned to see Prince Hines. They warn her to get away, but Van knows exactly who's behind this. Hines smiles, saying she can't leave, as it's her duty to protect them. The two nobles are immediately moved by her noble words. Of course they are. But Van's gaze is cold, his mind flashing back to her betrayal. He remembers how she always used words to capture hearts before sending people to their deaths. She calls for them to combine their strength against the enemy. But Van just smiles and flatly refuses. The others can only stare, completely shocked by his defiance. Hines can only stare back, completely taken aback by his words. Van simply repeats his refusal to work with her. He tells her flatly that her power isn't needed here. Her eyes widen, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. The two nobles immediately jump to her defense, demanding he show respect. But Van claims they would have already won if she hadn't gotten in the way, a statement that leaves the two nobles completely speechless. Guess their loyalty has its limits, Hines asks again, confirming if he truly doesn't need her help. He stands his ground before the raging beast, telling her that's right. He tells her to just watch from the sidelines like royalty should. The Hellsbore paws the ground, preparing for another charge. Van screams out a warning that the beast is coming. The three of them stand ready, a makeshift team against an impossible foe. The two nobles look on, their arrogance replaced by nervous resolve. The arrogant noble grits his teeth, determined to land at least one solid hit. But Van tells them not to rush, warning it would be a waste of their lives. He declares he has one shot left in him and that will be enough. He tells them both to wait for his signal. The two former bullies exchange a look, now ready to follow his lead. Hines watches from a distance, her expression unreadable. Van lets out a battle cry, declaring, "They'll settle this now." The two nobles shout in agreement, their earlier animosity forgotten. Amazing what a near-death experience can do for teamwork. He sprints forward, a blur of motion against the charging beast. He reminds himself not to panic, vowing to win without using that hidden power. His eyes glow as he prepares a new technique, lift impact. He meets the beast's tusk head-on, knowing it's become more cautious. It's learned from its failed charges, now using a more tactical hook thrust. Van dodges the attack with a confident grin. He knows the opening is smaller, but it's one he can exploit. The massive tusk sweeps past him, missing by mere inches. He leaps over the massive tusk, twisting in midair to avoid the blow, and lands a solid kick right on its head. The arrogant noble is stunned by his speed, but Hines sees something more than just quickness. She watches his every move with intense focus. Realizing he's using a high-level technique to move without wasted motion, a skill she's only seen from master martial artists, leaving her to wonder who he is. Van continues his relentless assault, a blur of motion against the raging beast. He lands another strike, never letting up. The noble admits it's an amazing display, but it's not enough. Hines knows that a fierce assault is useless. When non-magical strikes can't pierce its hide, the beast roars, more annoyed than injured. She confirms that his attacks are having no effect. But Van just smirks, saying this is perfect. His goal was never to wound it, only to make it angry. And the beast's furious roar proves his plan is working. His crimson eyes narrow, seeing his opening. He lands on its back and screams for the wind user to attack now. The noble unleashes his most powerful spell with a determined cry. The sand-infused wind tears into the beast's airways. The creature stumbles, blinded and choking on the attack. Van praises the perfect timing of the spell. He lands before the beast, ready to end this. Preparing a final technique, the crushing blow twin. He strikes with both hands, channeling all his power. A diagram explains how two impacts merge into one massive internal shockwave. The Hellsbore collapses, its eyes rolling back as it's finally defeated. Van grins, telling the swordsman he's the last one up. The young noble gathers his remaining strength and brings his blade down for the final blow. The massive beast finally collapses, defeated. The two nobles can only stare, unable to believe they actually won. Van lands softly, the battle finally over. But Hines watches him walk away, questioning his actions. Her eyes are wide with a mix of shock and confusion. Van doesn't even spare her a glance. Priorities, I guess. He offers a hand to the fallen swordsman, asking if he's all right. The boy takes it, admitting he thought his insides were scrambled. Van explains the beast's roar was just a sound attack easily countered. The swordsman smirks, vowing to remember that, and to never fight one again. With the immediate threat gone, Van turns his attention back to the exam, but his eyes widen in sudden realization. The patch of flowers was right in the middle of their battlefield. Hines points out the obvious. Only 2 flowers remain. He remembers the examiner's warning about large groups, and now he understands the true nature of the test. The two nobles look at each other, knowing what must be done. The swordsman holds the only 2 flowers that survived. He offers one to Hines, calling it his duty as a vassal. The arrogant noble calls him out for sucking up to the prince. He then turns and offers the final flower to Van. Van is surprised, but the boy insists it's to clear his debt. The arrogant noble finally introduces himself as Falk, and his friend, the swordsman, is named Ralph. Van takes in this unexpected turn of events. He extends his own hand, giving his name in return. But Falk reminds them that if they fail, this introduction is pointless. But Hines simply kneels down to the fallen flowers. She holds one up, a gentle smile on her face. Falk and Ralph can only stare in utter confusion. Van realizes she's using light magic to restore them. She offers the revived flowers to the 2 nobles. Van watches from a distance, a lone figure in the woods. Hines turns to him, her expression unreadable, and Van meets her gaze with a cold, steady stare. He looks up, the sun's rays catching his eyes. He notes that sunset is near and they need to leave. Falk immediately scolds him for ignoring the prince. Guess old habits die hard. But Hines just smiles, turning her attention to Van. She says she has a question for him. She points out that he was covering his footprints earlier. Van plays it cool, asking what she's getting at. She explains it's a technique known as assassin's etiquette. The 2 nobles are shocked by the accusation. Hines connects his fighting style with this ingrained habit and asks him directly if he's an assassin. Van's crimson eyes narrow, a faint smirk on his lips. The question hangs in the air. a silent challenge. He looks up, considering how to answer this very pointed question. Hines' gaze hardens as she explains her situation. The king took foreign princesses as queens to secure his power, but her mother was a noble from their own kingdom, making her a prime target for her jealous half-siblings. She admits she never knows when an attack will come. And if Van is one of their agents, she must act now. Van seems a little caught off guard by her directness. He realizes his old habit slipped out and decides to play dumb. He just shrugs, claiming he had no idea it was assassin etiquette. But Hines isn't buying it for a second. Van's playful expression vanishes in an instant. He challenges her, saying if that's how she wants to see it, then fine. Her gaze hardens, ready for a fight. And she suddenly leaps into the air, moving to strike. Falk and Ralph can only watch in complete shock. But Van plants his foot, ready to meet her head-on. Falk screams out a warning, but it's too late. Her eyes are locked on him, her intent clear. But he simply places a hand on her shoulder, stopping her cold. He tells her it was just a joke, asking her not to look so scary. Falk and Ralph are left wondering what is even happening anymore. Van apologizes for his poor manners, blaming it on his country upbringing. He stands before her, the picture of harmless innocence. But Hines knows he deliberately ignored an opening she gave him. Van forces himself to remain calm, his heart pounding. He knows she's testing him, and one wrong move will cost him everything. She tells him to answer her question one more time. She asks again about his movements, demanding to know if he's an assassin. Van quickly spins a lie, crediting Helene Steinartz for his training. He explains she taught him to hide his techniques since he only uses his hands. Internally, he apologizes to Helene for dragging her into this. Hines is stunned to learn his recommendation is from House Steinartz. Falk is equally shocked, explaining they're a powerful ducal house. The two nobles realize just how important Helene truly is. Hines considers this new information carefully. She knows Helene as the Ice Flower Lady, a top student well-versed in combat, and she knows the Steinartz family would never plot against the throne. Falk reasons that they must want to recruit Van to serve their house, but Hines just smiles, admitting if she'd met him first, she might have done the same. Van can only offer a slightly awkward thank you, but Hines' gaze sharpens as she continues. She claims the Hellsbore was the real threat, and they may have just saved her life. She offers them her heartfelt thanks, a picture of royal grace. Falk and Ralph are completely flustered, calling it an honor. Hook, line, and sinker. But Van just smirks, clarifying he didn't fight for her sake at all. Falk immediately explodes, but Van just points back, completely unfazed. Hines notes his defiance, a stark contrast to the others. She asks for his name one more time, her eyes fixed on him. She can only wonder at this truly mysterious boy. As the sun sets, the students return from the forest, the first exam finally over. Falk and Ralph congratulate each other on passing the trial, while another student despairs, wondering how he'll face his father. The bearded examiner asks for a final count of the remaining students. He can't believe it, finding the results very strange indeed. Hines reflects on the exam, knowing the beasts were meant to be weaker. She wonders if something unexpected happened to the beast she unleashed. Just then, a student shouts that someone is coming out. The bearded examiner looks up, eagerly asking if it's the prince. But it's Van, who walks out with a cheerful smile, asking if they're all here to greet him. The examiner's face contorts in pure, unadulterated shock. Van just looks back, his expression perfectly calm. He walks out of the forest without a care in the world. The examiner can only stare, his plan completely shattered. His colleague greets Van, but the bearded man screams in his mind, asking why he's still alive. Van turns to the examiner, cheekily asking if it's bad that he survived. The man quickly recovers, claiming he's just impressed Van made it out alone. A likely story. But Van just gives a thumbs up, telling him he wasn't alone. And right on cue, Falk and Ralph appear, dragging the massive Hellsbore behind them. The examiner can only scream in utter disbelief. Falk explains they brought the beast back as evidence. The purple-haired examiner is stunned while his colleague panics internally. And right on cue, Prince Hines arrives. The bearded examiner quickly covers his tracks, praising their impressive feat. Hines declares it was a truly magnificent battle. The bearded examiner's blood runs cold at the mention of the prince. He asks if she fought as well, but she claims she was just nearby. The bearded examiner realizes just how bad this situation is. He sent a demon beast after royalty, a crime punishable by death. Hines asks if he's all right, noting he looks a little pale. Understatement of the year. He quickly shifts gears, praising her for defeating the beast. But Van watches his over-the-top celebration with suspicion. Hines corrects him, saying she was merely present for the fight. She gives the credit to Van, admitting they would have died without him. The purple-haired examiner gives his colleague a very pointed look. The crowd murmurs, their attention now fixed on the Galda boy. Falk marvels that a Galda knows so much about magic, and Ralph confirms they fought under Van's command. The bearded examiner still can't believe a Galda led the charge. Hines reminds him of Van's powerful recommendation. Van internally apologizes to Helene again for the convenient lie. The other students whisper, their prejudice slowly giving way to awe. The purple-haired examiner approaches Van and offers a deep bow. He thanks him for protecting the prince, a duty he takes very seriously. But Van just shrugs, saying they were only defending themselves. He then holds out the flower he picked, presenting it along with the others to pass the exam. The examiner accepts their success with a smile, but his colleague can only seethe, his perfect plan in ruins. The examiner begins the final roll call, starting with Prince Hines. Next up is Falk, the arrogant noble who's had a change of heart, and his friend Ralph, who seems a lot more cheerful now. The bearded examiner waits with bated breath for the final name. He looks at Van, who stands there with quiet confidence, and the last name is called, confirming Van Kruger is present. Hines declares that all four of them have officially passed the exam. Falk and Ralph celebrate, acting like they never doubted it for a second. And just like that, Van is now a student at the Magic Academy. Later, the examiners agree to launch a full investigation into the demon beast's appearance. The next day, the new students gather for the entrance ceremony. The Academy's headmaster welcomes them all to their new life. He explains that they seek more than just magical talent here. They are looking for students with the true nobility, to become the kingdom's sword and shield. Van stands among them, a future he never could have imagined. He knows it's a small step, but the world is finally starting to change, and he vows to see this new path through to the very end. But from a balcony high above, someone is watching. It's Helene, the woman who gave him this chance, observing the ceremony. She walks through the sunlit halls of the academy and pushes open a heavy, ornate door. She enters a private meeting room where other students are waiting. The academy's most elite students all gathered in one place. Helene notes that it seems everyone has arrived. A pink-haired girl named Karina immediately scolds her for being late. Another girl, Amelia, asks about the purpose of their meeting. A purple-haired boy named Arnulf says there's only one thing they ever discuss, and a smug-looking prince declares their topic, the foreign substance. Helene's eyes narrow, repeating the term with quiet contempt. The prince complains that the school is getting too tolerant, treating a barbaric, non-magic user as an equal. His eyes narrow with disdain as he continues his rant. He points out that the one who recommended Van is a member of their own elite group, and he demands an explanation for this breach of tradition. All eyes turn to the one responsible, Helene Steinartz. A brief history lesson explains the academy is full of proud nobles whose disputes often lead to duels. To keep order, a group of idealistic students formed a disciplinary committee. They are known as the 5 Brilliant Crowns, the 5 most powerful students in the academy. The prince demands to know what Helene was thinking, giving a recommendation to a Galda. Helene's mind flashes to the boy she put her faith in. She calmly replies that she simply acknowledged his strength, and that's all. Karina laughs, questioning the very idea of a Galda having strength. The prejudice is strong with this one. She calls them a people cursed by God, incapable of possessing any real power. The red-haired girl, Amelia, agrees with her assessment. She asks how someone without magic can possibly protect the people. The prince chimes in, stating it's common sense that God doesn't exist for the magicless. But Helene scoffs at the very mention of common sense. She calls it a convenient excuse people use to justify their own bad customs. A tense silence falls as she stares down the prince. The purple-haired boy, Arnulf, finally speaks up, suggesting they test him. He proposes they find out if Van Kruger truly has power worthy of their academy. The prince loves the idea, turning to Helene for her approval. He adds that if Van fails, her own judgment will be called into question. But Helene just stands there, completely unfazed, and agrees to the terms. She tells them she doesn't care who they send after him, but if they don't want to embarrass themselves, they shouldn't underestimate him. The prince just smirks, intrigued by her unwavering confidence. Karina eagerly volunteers for the job, practically bouncing in her seat. The prince gives her the go-ahead, sending her on her mission. Helene asks if Van has caught her interest, but Karina says she just wants to crush him and his arrogance. Helene's gaze is steady, her decision made. Meanwhile, Van walks through the sunlit academy halls. The other students chatter about their classes and rankings. A normal, peaceful school life he's never known. He reflects that it's been a quiet week since he enrolled. Aside from a few unwelcoming greetings, of course. In class, the professor lectures on magical theory. He looks for a student to put on the spot, and calls on Van to explain a complex magical concept. Van sits calmly, ready for the challenge. The other students whisper, admitting they don't even know the answer. The professor smirks, mocking the idea of a Galda understanding magic. But Van begins to explain the theory perfectly. The professor's jaw practically hits the floor. Van continues, detailing its use in modern magic. He even offers a more detailed explanation with a confident smile. What a flex. The professor can only stammer that his answer is sufficient. And since that day, the open harassment has completely stopped. Just then, Ralph claps him on the shoulder with a grin. He asks why Van looks so serious, suggesting they get lunch. Van smiles, admitting the peace is partly thanks to him and Falk. Ralph seems completely confused by the compliment. Van just says he's been a big help and leads the way. The two walk down the hall, a budding friendship forming. But a new voice stops them in their tracks. Van turns, asking what she wants. The purple-haired girl claims he walked right past her. He apologizes, but she's clearly not satisfied. A blade is suddenly held to his throat. She sneers that a Galda should know his place and grovel. Van calmly states there's no need for such hostility, but she asks if he truly understands his place. The blade presses closer to his throat. Ralph shouts that she's taking things too far. She offers him a peaceful life if he just learns to obey. Ralph looks on in horror as Van's expression darkens. He grabs the blade, saying he tends to do the opposite when threatened. Classic reverse psychology. She tries to pull back, wary of his strength. But Van twists the blade, turning her own force against her. Her stance breaks as she instinctively tightens her grip. All of her weight is now focused on the thin metal, and with a final precise movement, he shatters the sword into pieces. A technique called blade break, which pushes the metal past its limit. He mocks her for using such a fragile, non-magical weapon. A weapon clearly meant only for training, not for actual combat. She seethes, admitting real blades are forbidden on campus. But Van latches onto a new term: 5 brilliant crowns. The girl declares her part is done and walks away, just as a new challenger appears, vowing to correct his behavior. Ralph recognizes her as the legendary sword princess, Karina. Van looks up, sensing an immense and dangerous power. Blood Edge, Karina, a warrior who has taken countless lives. He can only wonder what someone like her is doing here.